Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest is Lori Gottlieb. Lori, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. You are a psychotherapist. You write the Dear Therapist column for The Atlantic. And also you are a New York Times best-selling author, and we want to talk about your book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. So let's talk about the book because it fascinated me. What motivated you to write it?
Well, originally I was supposed to be writing a book about happiness. And I was just starting out as a therapist, and the happiness book was making me miserable. The irony wasn't lost on me.
And you talk about that in the book.
I do talk about that in the book. The struggle between what I was seeing in the therapy room and trying to sort of quantify happiness through these scientific studies. And I realized that I really wanted to bring people into the therapy room and show them what real people were going through, what real life looks like. And that includes the joys, the triumphs, the good things too. And so that's what I do. I take 4 patients and we follow their stories. And then there's a 5th patient in the book, and that 5th patient is me.
So first of all, the book's like something like 425 pages long. So it's not something you wrote very quickly, obviously. How long did it take you to do this?
It took about a year, and it's under 400 pages. So, but it's it flowed very easily because I was telling stories of things that had actually happened, and I knew the stories very well. And what was interesting in the writing process was how everybody's story was in conversation with everybody else's, that there were aspects of every single person that you could see reflected in every other person. And I think that's what readers find too, is that they see themselves in these stories.
So at the beginning of the book, and actually a fairly major theme throughout it, is your situation where you're with a man who you see as your life partner, you're planning to marry, and he kind of out of the blue tells you that's just not going to happen. So not going to happen. What happened in your perspective?
Right. So my boyfriend and I were planning to get married, and one day he tells me that he's decided he can't live with a kid under his roof for the next 10 years. That kid at the time was my 8-year-old, and who had not been hiding in a closet the entire time we were dating. And so my version of the story, and I very intentionally say my version of the story at the time, was this is completely out of the blue. I didn't see this coming. I've been blindsided. Right.
But of course, as you progress through the book, and with the help of a therapist you go to, a therapist going to a therapist, and that's Wendell in the book. By the way, I thought it was fascinating you have pseudonyms for everyone in the book to protect their anonymity because you're telling their stories and true stories, and you mentioned you got permission, obviously, to do all that. But you never give a name to your boyfriend, you just call him boyfriend. So I thought that was really, so every time I saw the word, it made me laugh anyway. So I thought that was certainly a different approach. But
well, it's interesting. I call him boyfriend because he starts off sort of as a non-person, meaning that all of the other people in the book are very fleshed out, and he starts out through my lens, which at the time was he's the villain. And of course he's not the villain. And you see through the book that I had a role in this too. And I think that was what was really important in all of the stories, which is that people seem one way when we first meet them in the book, and then we learn so much more about them and their stories and the truth of their stories as we start to really explore them.
Well, and one of the things as your story develops, and with the help of your therapist, is it becomes obvious that there were a lot of signs, there was a lot of data, there was a lot of information that this boyfriend really wasn't headed in the same direction you were, and you weren't picking up a lot of those signals. I'd like you to talk about that as a therapist, because I think a lot of us do get information, do get feedback from people, and we don't see it, or we intentionally ignore it. We don't want to see it. So tell me about that whole kind of avoidance phenomenon.
Right. Sometimes we avoid looking at things that are right in front of us, and then we say, I never saw that coming. In my case, there were some discrete incidents where it was clear that he was not a kid person, but I didn't want to look at that because, of course, I have a kid. And he, by the way, was a divorced father, and so I thought, well, he's a father, he likes kids.
Right, he had twins.
Yeah. So you look at the data, that you want to look at. So you selectively look at the things you want to look at. And one thing that I think happens in therapy is that the therapist will hold up a mirror to you and say, I want you to look at your reflection, and I want you to see yourself in a way that you have chosen not to. And that sounds like something that most people would not want to engage in. But actually, we're playing the long game here. It's not the short game of, oh, you dodged a bullet, your boyfriend was a jerk. You know, the things that I call idiot compassion. Wise compassion is, I want you to look at something so that you can see a pattern, or you can see something that you did so that you don't repeat it.
Well, one of the things that kind of also fascinated me with that situation was boyfriend had 2 kids, had twins. And so your implicit assumption at one point was, well, I mean, you have kids, he must like kids, he's a father, just like you were saying. I have a kid. We've been together for 2 years. He hasn't said anything. And what you didn't realize is his kids were about to go off to college, and he was excited about not having kids anymore in his house.
Right, but also, see, he wasn't clear. So he very much, we wanted to be together. Both of us wanted to be together. It wasn't a case of, oh, he didn't want to be with me, or I didn't want to be with him. It was a case of he was really grappling with the fact that he really loved me and thought he could kind of put aside this feeling that he had inside him of, oh no, the empty nest, I've been looking forward to that, but oh no, I met this woman and she has a kid. And he tried to kind of reconcile those two things and didn't tell me about that. And then I would see these signs that he was maybe grappling with that, but I didn't want to talk about it because I knew that if I brought it up, unconsciously, I knew that if I brought it up, we would have to have that conversation.
One of the things I really enjoyed was how you vented about him when you were really angry at him, and just the descriptions and the names you called him when you were speaking with your friends and even your therapist were, at the minimum, quite entertaining. But there was one aspect that I wanted to ask you about, and that is you spent, as you describe in the book, a number of sessions when you did go to a therapist, when you were with Wendell, complaining about boyfriend, but session after session after session. And as a therapist, in your case as a therapist, not me, that surprised me. I would have thought at a much earlier point you would have realized that I'm just doing the same thing over and over again, and these are things I can vent to my friends about constantly or repeatedly, but there's not a lot of benefit to doing that in session.
Right, there's not, and I think when I first went to my therapist, I wanted what a lot of people want when they come to their therapist, which is they want the therapist to validate their position. So my therapist picked up on what we really needed to talk about in the very first session, which was I was complaining about the fact that I was telling him the story, and I told him what happened, and I said, and now I'm in my 40s, and I've been dating him all this time, and I've wasted all this time, and half my life is over. And he glommed onto that statement, half my life is over. And so in the book, it's not a book about a breakup. I mean, very quickly we get to what I'm really dealing with, which are all the things that I didn't want to talk about, which was here I am at midlife, and how do I find meaning? What are all these other things that I'm spending time on that I really don't want to be spending time on? There was a health crisis that I was going through that I needed to look at. My aging parents, there was something going on with that. There were a lot of kind of things that happen to people as they become aware of their mortality. And that's what the therapy really was about.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We will be back with Lori in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We're with Lori Gottlieb. One of the things you do in the book, and I'd like you to talk about, is the concept of behind the curtain and showing what therapy's like, the stories that you follow of your patients and how they evolve, and some of them very, very seriously in terms of health. I'm thinking of Julie in particular, kind of up and down and up and then way down. Talk a little bit about your goal there and how you feel you accomplished that, the behind the curtain phenomenon, and giving the reader a kind of an inside view.
I really wanted to demystify what therapy is, because I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions. Some people think that you go to therapy, you talk about your childhood ad nauseum, and you never leave. That's not what therapy is, or at least what good therapy is. And I wanted people to see also, the joys, the ways that people grow and transform and change. And what we actually do, what the work actually looks like. Because I think it's very inspiring. I think at the end of the day, the book is a very inspirational book. But I also wanted to give people an education. So I tell them, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm feeling, here's why I'm not giving advice in this instance, here's why I am giving it in this other instance, here's what I'm thinking about whether I like the person, here's what it means to work with somebody and how you feel about them. And I think that will raise people's comfort level with the process. So if they're thinking maybe they should talk to someone, that it would make them more likely to say, I'm not as afraid of what that process is. It's not like a wizard who has all these tricks and tools. It's just a human being talking to me and helping me to guide me to a better place.
Well, and you also talk about, I think it was kind of interesting and entertaining in terms of a therapist's perspective on a patient and whether or not you like your patient, and if you're looking for something good or good things about your patient. And of course, your patient John is probably the best example. You use some derogatory terms at times to describe him and his behavior.
Well, I did that in the same way when I introduced Boyfriend, right, as sort of the villain. John comes off as incredibly abrasive when I first meet him. He's very hard to like. He's insulting to me. He distracts with jokes, and their jokes are put downs. But I know that his behavior is protective, that the way we behave is a way of coping with something unmanageable in our lives. And so I thought it was really important for the reader to feel what I felt at the beginning so that they could come to see him the way I later saw him. And readers have said that of all the patients that I write about in the book, they've come to love John the most, as I did, right? And so I really play with the way that what we think about someone when we first meet them can be very different once we get to know the truth of who they are.
Well, I'm thinking, I didn't count the words, but you certainly wrote about him as much, if not more, than any of the other characters throughout the book. When's the best time, in terms of therapy, when's the best time to seek therapy? And are there times that are far more effective, and are there times when it's just really difficult to help someone?
We have a very different idea of how we treat our physical well-being versus our emotional well-being. So with your physical well-being, if you're feeling like chest pain, for example, you're not going to wait. You're going to go to a cardiologist and get that checked out. But if you're feeling emotional pain, if something feels off with your emotions, so many times people say, well, I have a roof over my head and food on the table, so it's not really that serious. And so they wait and they wait and they wait, and then they have the equivalent of an emotional heart attack, and that's sometimes when they land in therapy. And it's so much better if they come when they're first feeling that something is off or they're feeling the pain, because it's harder to treat later, but it takes longer to treat later, but also they've suffered unnecessarily for all of that time when they didn't come in.
One of the challenges when you think of, you're a therapist, people come to you, but the process of making a decision to go to a therapist, I think is really difficult for a lot of people. And a lot of people may feel, gosh, I don't feel right, or I can tell I need some kind of help or guidance or some type of professional assistance, but how do I find that? Where do I go? What's that process? And I think most people don't have answers to any of those questions.
That's true. There's not an easy formula for finding a therapist. Most people, they look at their insurance list, and you can look online or Psychology Today once you have those names from your list and see what those people seem like, but you don't really know until you get in the room with somebody. And what I say to people is the first session is a consultation. It's an opportunity for you to sit with that person and see what it's like. And if you leave the session and you ask yourself, did I feel understood, and was this person easy to talk to? If both of those things are true, I would go back for a second session.
And if they're not true?
And if they're not, maybe you try somebody else.
Yeah, I always recommend at least 3. That's my advice.
Here's the thing. If you go to 3 and you feel misunderstood and the person wasn't easy to talk to, it's kind of like that old joke that, if every bar that you walk into, there's a fight, maybe it's you. At a certain point you have to say, is this me, or is this really that there's no therapist who I can connect with?
I guess my attitude is probability. I look at it more from a probability perspective, that if you try 3, one of them's probably going to be good.
Right, right.
But, I've been wrong before, so
Yeah.
you never know. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back and talk more with Lori in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
Safely stop fires around your home. Introducing the Fire Ice XT 20-ounce aerosol canister. Fire Ice XT is an eco-friendly water-based fire suppressant gel. Unlike a traditional fire extinguisher, Fire Ice XT is a highly effective, non-toxic firefighting agent that is easy and safe to use around your home, family, and pets. Available at Amazon.com or call 800-924-4874.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment with Lori Gottlieb. So I'd like you to maybe talk a little bit about what therapists can do and what they can't do, and also what your friends can and can't do, and when to rely on each. I'm big on relying on friends, probably more than I should, but give me your take on those two.
Both are really valuable. I think they provide different things. So when you talk to your friends about something, what I talked about earlier about idiot compassion and wise compassion, they generally will take your side. And that feels really great in the moment. But it might not help you see something that a therapist will be able to help you see. But we also, friends are really important. One of the things that people come in with so much is no matter what their initial problem is, there seems to be an underlying loneliness, even if they're surrounded by people, even if they have a lot of friends, they have family. I think that we aren't connecting in a way that feels nourishing. We aren't connecting face to face and sitting down without something pinging or ringing or vibrating or a screen on the wall, and really talking to each other, and not only talking, but listening. When I was in training, a supervisor said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. There's a reason for that ratio. And I think that sometimes...
Usually parents say that to kids, but...
But I think it's true in marriages. I think it's true in friendships. I think it's true the other way around with parents and kids, that sometimes we need to listen to our kids more instead of doing so much talking. So I think that in therapy what we do is we hope to get you to a place where you can have better relationships, and then you can spend more time talking to your friends, but maybe on a deeper level.
Well, and certainly, a great illustration in the book is what Wendell does for you, which is something in terms of that journey and opening your eyes to different things. You can't really rely on your friends to do. Unless your
Right.
friends are therapists or something.
Well, even then, one of my best friends is a therapist, and she said maybe you should go talk to
Right.
somebody when I was going through this, because you can't go to your friends. Your friends are biased. One thing Wendell did that was so brilliant was he said, you remind me of this cartoon, and it's of a prisoner shaking the bars, desperately trying to get out, but on the right and the left, the bars are open. And it was so eye-opening because, so many times we feel trapped by our circumstances or the people in our lives, but we do have choices. And the problem is that, if we walk around those bars, we're free, but with freedom comes responsibility. And a lot of us are very afraid of responsibility. That's something that a friend couldn't have explained to me in the same way.
Well, and that was my reference earlier, that you, when you were in the initial sessions, and it seemed like a large number of sessions just to complain and to talk about boyfriend and how he was terrible. That struck me as a great example of what you, I mean, you were there holding those bars and not ready to make that move.
Right, and I think grief is like that too. I mean, one of the things I talk a lot about in the book is grief and our misconceptions about grief, that you go through these 5 stages, denial, anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance. I just have them in the wrong order there.
And you were tracking your own progression, which was really, I thought, funny in the book.
But those were written for people who were dealing with their own death, like Julie in the book, who has cancer and she's dying, and how do you deal with the grief of losing your life, losing your own life. But people, when they're going through grief, whether it's like a miscarriage or losing a child or a divorce or a breakup or whatever the loss is, it's not like you come to this place of quote unquote closure, that it gets integrated into your life and you move forward. And that's very different. So I was going through this grieving process, and I think for these sort of silent losses, again, like miscarriages or breakups that are not loss of a tangible child or loss of a tangible marriage, that people tend to think, well, in a few weeks you'll be, up and running, but you're still grieving and there is still a loss.
One of the things you talk about too is just both directly and indirectly the concept of candor in therapy, that if you're not honest with your therapist and yourself, that maybe you're not going to get the kind of help that you need. Talk about that and how people are really vulnerable, and it's really difficult for any of us to admit we're wrong or talk about the mistakes we made, and it's way more fun to blame it on boyfriend.
It is. It feels better in the moment, again. But, I think the difference is that we keep secrets, not only from people in the world and people close to us, but we keep secrets from ourselves. And then we keep secrets from our therapists as a result of that. So a lot of those secrets are based in shame. Carl Jung called secrets psychic poison because they're all about shame. But what people don't realize is that once you show who you are, when you're authentic with another person, they're not going to run away from you. They're actually going to be drawn toward you. They're going to see themselves in you, because our experiences are universal. We're more the same than we are different, but everybody thinks that whatever their shame is unique to them, that they're not normal, that something's wrong with them, that they're unlovable, that they're not worthy. And the opposite is true when you start to talk about what's really going on.
I know we only have a few minutes left. I was interested in your concept of systems and how when you do get help or therapy, how it can have a ripple effect. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. So when in a family, it's interesting. So say there's a problematic person in the family, and
Who
everybody
doesn't
says,
have one?
Right. So let's say the person, whatever, they drink too much, or they're creating drama, or they're depressed, or whatever's going on. And the family members will say, you need to go get help. So they go and get help, and then they start to get better. And then the family, ironically, doesn't really like this so much. They don't realize that, but they start to sort of sabotage it, like, oh, are you sure you don't want to, have a drink, or, just one, or, whatever it is, because then the problematic person is no longer problematic, so they have to look at whatever else was going on in the family system. And then they have to look at, oh, maybe I'm a problem in some way, or maybe I was not looking at my problems because I could focus all of my attention on the problematic person. So the system wants to go back to homeostasis. And so it's interesting when someone comes in and they start to really do well, and you see that the family, on the one hand, is very happy about it, but on the other hand, maybe they have to look at things that were going on in the family that now maybe they're not so happy to look at.
Let me ask you, what can we do about the stigma associated with mental health and getting help?
The more we talk about, our emotional lives as something that's just normal and a natural part of the human condition, the more people will feel less shame about getting help. A lot of people feel like, well, something's wrong with me, I'm broken, it's embarrassing. But the truth is that nobody gets through life without struggling. There's no person in the world who is immune from struggle. And the problem is that we're not talking about it, and we're all kind of suffering in silence. And the more that we make this a normal part of life, the better we'll get, the happier we'll be, and the less the less hesitant we'll be to talk about it when we need to.
So, let's talk about you as a therapist. I mean, I'm intrigued by how challenging for any therapist that must be emotionally. I mean, you're dealing with all day, or a good part of the day, or a few days a week, depending on your schedule, often some really intense problems. How do you deal with that, all of that input, which is so serious, and I mean, therapists are caring people, and they're seeing these sometimes really terrible situations, and situations that aren't always very easy to resolve or provide help for?
I would say two things about that. First is we have consultation groups, and we meet with them every week and talk about our cases, and that's really helpful. Right. So we're not
over a glass of wine and
exactly.
I write
about them in
I
the
know
book.
in the book. That's my point. Yeah, right.
Where I think people don't realize that therapists talk to other therapists about their cases, so we're not just working alone in the room in that way. But I think the other thing is that in any therapy session, you're going to see someone do something that feels heroic to them. Something, it's a micro moment. It's not like this big thing. It's a big thing if you look from the day they came in to the day they leave. You're going to see significant change. But if you look at every session, you're going to see them take a risk that they didn't take. You're going to see them talk about something they couldn't talk about. You're going to see them have an insight that they didn't have. You're going to see something happen between you and the patient that is a beautiful, moving, meaningful moment that they will take out into their lives. So I think people think, oh, you listen to people complain all day. That is not my job.
All right, last question. We only have half a minute left. Your advice column. Tell me about that, what you enjoy about that, and what's the challenge when you're giving advice, and though technically you're not giving medical or psychological advice, you kind of are, and such a public platform.
It's really different getting a letter from someone than meeting someone face to face and having an ongoing relationship with them in therapy. So in a letter, I know that I'm only hearing their side of the story. I know that they're not going to be very flexible with their story, and I can't ask follow-up questions. So what I want to do is I want to give them in the column the broader perspective of, it's not, here's what you should say to your mother-in-law, so much as, I want you to think about the situation more broadly. I want you to think about it the way I as a therapist would be thinking about it if you came in for a first session, and I wouldn't necessarily say this in a first session, but because I only get one opportunity in this letter, I'm going to put it all out there and give it to you to think about. What I like to say is I like to deliver compassionate truth bombs in the column.
I want to add one thing that impressed me is your answers are extraordinarily thorough. So it's like I'm going to cover everything I can because I just have this one shot.
Right.
Lori, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Remember to buy Lori's book. Maybe you should talk to someone. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.